Oh, hello there. Yes, I just thought we'd do a little bit of a dive into the latest.
You're watching Deprogram.
Cultue
My name's Harrison
Forum
Pitt.
video.
I'm a writer for the
Yes.
European Conservative, and I'm happy to be joined this week, as ever, by Evan Riggs, who is a freelance journalist, and Rob Henderson, who is a recent PhD graduate from the University of Cambridge in psychology. Now, gents, we've been at the National Conservatism Conference this week. It's still ongoing at the moment, but it's made lots of headlines. But before we get into the policy matters, let's talk about Rob's area of speciality. You've coined this phrase, luxury beliefs. Can you explain to our viewers what that's all about?
Right, so luxury beliefs, this is a framework I've developed. The definition is luxury beliefs, ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while often inflicting costs on the lower classes. And there are multiple components to this, so just very briefly, for me it starts with a book that was written in 1899 by Thorstein Veblen, who was an economist and sociologist. He wrote this book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. And what Veblen wrote about in the late 19th century is his observations and analyses of class. Back then, people measured status through luxury goods, through material goods. So they couldn't people couldn't necessarily be certain about the financial status of other people. So a good way to size up their means is to see whether they could afford expensive goods, whether they could partake in expensive and time-consuming activities like golf and beagling, and these are sort of visible signals of wealth and status and prestige. My claim is that today, luxury goods and material expressions of status, these are just noisier signals of one's position on the class hierarchy. And 100 years ago, if you walked through any major city in the world, it was apparent who was rich and who was poor just by how they looked. Today, it's a less reliable indicator just by how they're dressed, where they are on that scale.
Okay, just to hold that. Yes, I mean, I think we can all vaguely agree with that. The thing that amused me initially watching this is that these are three guys that have dressed down, one of whom is in a three-piece suit with cufflinks. Okay, they're not wearing ties, but they do look like off-duty Tory MPs. Yeah, I mean, the class background of these three is quite intriguing. If you actually look at the three of them, they do come from very different places, but they have all converged here, which is slightly odd one way or another. Okay, so we're going to come on to what we in sociology would call the concept of cultural capital, which, I don't know, has probably been an idea knocking around for about 70 odd years. Anyone who's done sociology A-level will be very familiar with the term. I'll let this play on a little bit, but this is where I've started to sort of smile at these kind of things, because they're talking about unusual beliefs here, and they do go on to hold a lot. And they also talk about educated people holding these beliefs, which might well have a negative effect on people from lower classes, as somebody here said earlier. Anyway, let's just watch a little bit more of this.
And so now people express their luxury beliefs. They express their sort of position on the status hierarchy through unusual and peculiar and fashionable ideas, opinions, habits, behaviors, tastes, customs, whatever is sort of conventional and whatever sort of opinions are held by ordinary people. A good way to signal that you are not one of the ordinary people, not one of the masses, is to hold the opposite opinion, or to hold an opinion that often makes very little sense at first, but you can, if you've attended expensive universities and listen to the right podcasts, read the right books, and consume sort of the proper and sophisticated media channels, then you can sort of come up with the intellectual acrobatics necessary to defend these unusual luxury beliefs.
So what are some of the beliefs then?
A notable recent example is the defund the police movement.
Okay, let's say it's...
Yes, indeed. So the concept of defunding the police, which is often sort of used generically, I suppose, as a sort of sneering at what might be called the liberal left, coming up with these stupid ideas that nobody can get behind. And again, that's a lot to do with education. Many people will sneer at my beliefs, and I often think to myself, yeah, but I actually know about this stuff because because I read a lot, would be one of the things. Then, I've jumped on now, but there is a discussion about who represents the British elite, this scary group of people who are somehow magically in control of other people. And the best that they can come up with is Gary Lineker. And my jaw nearly hit the floor when they said that, because I'm thinking, he's a football pundit. He's a guy with no real social power whatsoever. He's a football pundit. If that's the best name you can come up with this elite group that are dominating with their ideas in society, then you've got a problem. Harrison keeps trying to drag this back to the National Conservative Conference that was held this week. And, I would argue, if you want to talk about a bunch of people that are spouting a group of beliefs that could potentially have enormously negative aspects on people at the bottom, then that's a really good place to start.
We can bring it into a sort of British political context. We've got this framework in which we have these elites and we have the rest of society, and while the elites are sort of safe and sound in their own sort of life rafts of virtue, everyone else is sort of drowning in a sea of moral relativism that the elites themselves don't do anything to try and redeem. So that's the sort of situation we have. And I was very interested yesterday. I found most of the we're at the National Conservatism Conference at the moment. I found most of the Tory MP speakers incredibly disappointing. Well, not disappointing, because I wasn't expecting a huge amount in the first place, but I wasn't impressed. But I was very impressed, I must say, by Miriam Cates, who seems to be attacking that sort of that mentality. So, for example, she gave a very good speech on the need to boost Britain's fertility rates, and of course, the classical liberal formulation would say, well, whose business is it? What business is it of a government minister to say that people should be having more children? That involves that involves the imposition of a certain standard on the rest of society, and as we know, there are no shared substantive moral goods on the liberal hypothesis. People pursue their own goods. And obviously, Miriam Cates was pointing out yesterday that can lead to a situation in which the whole damn society cannot sustain itself, because conservatism, the thing that distinguishes conservatism from liberalism, is that it's about, yes, freedom plays a role, but it's about making sure that the sort of the behaviors and practices, norms and customs that are necessary for a social organism to maintain itself through time, intergenerationally, to make sure that those don't suffer, that those are not corroded by a sort of race to the bottom in standards. What do you think?
Right, yes, indeed, a race to the bottom in standards. So women can just have more children, and we'll do our damnedest to ensure in an authoritarian way that that's going to happen. Again, it's an irony-free zone. And, to talk about morality in the same breath as any Tory MP. Miriam Cates, yes, brilliant. Evangelical Christian who wants her evangelical Christian views on science and transgenderism to be imposed. And just today we have the news that luckily Boris Johnson, that upstanding Tory MP, is imposing his own particular views on the world through yet another child. I find a lot of this stuff really quite astounding, because to my ears, and I'm not classically liberal at all, I come from a far different left-wing tradition to that, but it just sounds like that these guys are tilting at windmills of
conservatism. The thing that distinguishes conservatism from liberalism is that it's about, yes, freedom plays a role, but it's about making sure that the sort of the behaviors and practices, norms and customs that are necessary for a social organism to maintain itself through time, intergenerationally, to make sure that those don't suffer, that those are not corroded by a sort of race to the bottom in standards. What do you think? So Miriam Cates gave a very good speech on that. What broadly speaking, what do you think we on the right can do better? Just to finish up, what do you think we on the right can do better to puncture the logic of people who believe in luxury beliefs, and really to see those cheap illusions shatter?
Well, so one thing on the point of the fertility, as you were speaking, something that just occurred to me, which is that governments already do sort of take a political stance on the fertility debate, because they will often supply contraception,
of course, you're right,
and abortion and so on. And so, and if a politician were to sort of describe how we need to actually have fewer children because of the climate and so on, I suspect a lot of the people who are currently decrying, the politicians talking about the fertility crisis would be in support of it. On the other hand, so it doesn't really seem to be about
neutrality,
fertility or neutrality. It's really about trying to reduce the population. That seems to be.
You're right. There was a sort
of
to
take this sort of anti-family, anti-children, or is this anti-natalist?
There's a moralistic anti-natalist strain to contemporary leftism, particularly on the climate issue. Yes, but
okay, yes, indeed. Having been broadly in support of the notion that an authoritarian state should probably make people have more children, you then decry authoritarian policies which might suggest that people have fewer children. A brief cursory look at anything in the UK will tell you that the reason why people don't have children in the UK is because they can't afford to. From a Marxist materialist viewpoint, it's an economic issue. That's why people aren't having kids, and you can complain as much as you like about the morality of that, but it doesn't change the economics, and the economics are not set by Gary Lineker. Okay, let's just finish up with some final thoughts there from Rob.
I could easily imagine someone hearing that and then deciding to read, some journalist's expose about, like through the lens of some kind of ideology about how actually what we need is mass economic redistribution or something along those lines. Yeah. But I think also there's this sort of the cultural piece, and that's what I'd like people to sort of pay attention to. Is like, okay, there's the economic issue. I acknowledge that's important, but also the cultural issue of, what happens when policies and beliefs and ideas sort of and fashionable opinions actually seep into policy and attitudes. And I think like the defund the police example is a good one. Like, read about the experiences of someone in a low-income, high-crime area and how things have changed in their neighborhood since 2020, and then sort of reconsider what you believed, and then also to sort of extend that to other examples as well. That if you hear some new and provocative idea, to really sort of think about the second order consequences and really reflect. I mean, I think you have a duty. Like, some people have accused me, the luxury beliefs idea, you're sort of accusing people of holding malicious intent, like they're actively trying to hurt other people.
But you think it's well intentioned?
I think for a small segment of people, they actually do hold malicious intent, but I think the vast majority, they're just sort of going along to get along. They just say the things that they need to say to receive status.
Everyone's doing.
Okay, and just to leap in there, I'm just sort of thinking on that line about, ideas on the right. Do you remember in 2010 when we really needed austerity? Or do you remember in the 2010s when we really needed Brexit? Yeah, fashionable ideas that people just go along with and spout to fit in. Jonathan Gullis et al. Yeah. Anyway, do watch the whole thing. I'll leave a link down below. As I say, I just so often find these kind of things irony-free zones whereby a bunch of people who actually are in a position to have real influence on others don't think through the consequences of what they are really saying, because they are isolated from it. Say, irony free.